The Galactic Council Citadel was the largest structure ever built by any living species. It was a ring of metal and light that circled a dying star, home to ambassadors from 412 worlds. Every species that mattered had a seat inside its great hall. And for the last 10 years, humanity had been allowed to sit in the back row and watch. Suho adjusted the collar of his dark uniform and stepped off the transport shuttle. The air inside the Citadel always smelled faintly of copper, and something sweet he could never name. Behind him, Hana carried a thin data tablet under her arm and walked with the quiet confidence of someone who had already read every document that would be discussed today. 10th year, she said, matching his pace. 10th year, Suho repeated. They walked through the long corridor that led to the human embassy wing. The walls were lined with banners from every member species. Bright colors, strange symbols, proud history stretching back thousands of years. The human banner hung at the very end, smaller than the rest, half hidden behind a support column. Nobody had bothered to move it. Suho did not look at it. He had stopped looking at it 3 years ago. Today was the annual review. Every year the council evaluated humanity's status. Every year they added new conditions. First it was technology sharing, then it was territorial limits, and it was disarmament clauses that no other species had to follow. Every year Suho smiled, nodded, and accepted. Every year he told himself that patience was a strategy, not a weakness. But this morning, Hana had shown him something that changed everything. She had spent the past 6 months studying council voting records, trade agreements, and closed-session transcripts that she had obtained through methods Suho decided not to ask about. The pattern she found was clear and ugly. The council was not slow to accept humanity out of caution. They were slow on purpose. Every new condition they imposed removed one more piece of leverage from Earth's hands. Every delay pushed humanity further into dependence on council trade routes, council protection, council approval. It was not diplomacy. It was a cage built one bar at a time. They never planned to let us in, Hana had told him that morning, her voice flat and certain. Suho had said nothing for a long time. Then he had picked up his uniform and gotten dressed for the session. The great hall of the council was enormous. Thousands of seats rose in a spiral around a central platform where speakers addressed the assembly. Light from the dying star outside filtered through massive windows, casting everything in shades of gold and amber. It was beautiful. It was designed to make you feel small. Suho and Hana took their seats in the observer section. Around them, delegates from dozens of species filled the hall with noise. The Drethani, tall and sectoid creatures with sharp limbs and compound eyes, occupied the highest seats. Their high speaker, Vorath, sat at the very top, watching everything with the patience of a spider. The session began with minor trade disputes and border agreements. Suho listened with half his attention. He had heard it all before. The real business always came later, when the powerful species spoke and the smaller ones stayed silent. 2 hours into the session, the Talaki ambassador rose to speak. His name was Gorvan, and he was enormous, a broad, heavy creature covered in thick gray plates, with a voice like stone grinding against stone. They respected strength and despised anything they saw as weakness. Gorvan looked directly at the human section and smiled. "Before we continue," he said, his voice booming through the hall, "I wish to note the presence of our human observers. 10 years they have sat among us. 10 years they have begged for a seat at the table. And still they bring nothing but their soft skin and their short lives." He paused for effect. Infant predators playing at civilization. Laughter rippled through the hall. Not from everyone, but from enough. Suho did not move. His face showed nothing. Beside him, Hana's grip on her tablet tightened until her knuckles turned white, but she too remained still. Vorath watched from above. He did not laugh. He did not silence the laughter either. He simply let it happen, and that was worse. The session ended without any progress on humanity's membership. New conditions would be proposed next cycle. Suho already knew what they would say. Afterward, as Suho and Hana walked back to the embassy wing, a figure approached them from a side corridor. It was Ilsha, the Miravin delegate. The Miravin were an aquatic species, tall, slender, with smooth blue-green skin and long tentacles that moved constantly as they spoke. Ilsha was one of the few aliens who had ever shown genuine kindness to the human delegation. She looked nervous. Her tentacles curled and uncurled rapidly. "Ambassador Suho," she said quietly, "I need to tell you something. There is a resolution being drafted in closed session. It would permanently limit your fleet to its current size and restrict human colonization to your home system. No expansion, no growth, forever." Hana's eyes widened. "When?" "3 cycles, perhaps less. It has enough support to pass." Suho stared at Ilsha for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. "Truly." Ilsha hesitated, then touched his arm gently with one tentacle. "I am sorry," she whispered. Then she turned and disappeared down the corridor. That night, Suho sat alone in his quarters aboard the human embassy wing and opened a secure channel to Earth. The face that appeared on the screen belonged to Minho, the head of Earth's Interstellar Defense Council. He was a lean man with sharp eyes and a permanent expression that suggested he had already considered every possible outcome of whatever conversation he was about to have. Suho told him everything. The pattern Hana had found, the secret resolution, the laughter in the hall. Minho listened without interrupting. When Suho finished, there was a long silence. "We prepared for this," Minho finally said. His voice was calm, not surprised, not angry, just ready. "I know," Suho said. "Then you know what comes next." Suho closed his eyes. He thought about 10 years of smiling, 10 years of swallowing insults, 10 years of believing that if humanity just tried hard enough, they would earn their place. He opened his eyes. "Yes," he said, "I know." He ended the call and walked to the viewport. The dying star outside glowed a deep, angry red. Beyond it, somewhere in the dark, Earth waited. Suho pressed his hand against the cold glass and thought one thing. They never wanted us here. The morning session of the Galactic Council began the way it always did. Delegates filed into the Great Hall, their voices filling the vast space with the noise of 100 different languages. Aides carried documents. Advisors whispered strategies into the ears of their ambassadors. The golden light of the dying star poured through the windows and made everything glow. But something was wrong. The human seats were empty. At first, nobody noticed. Humanity's section was small and tucked away in the back of the observer gallery, easy to overlook on a normal day. But as the minutes passed and the seats remained vacant, a few delegates began to glance in that direction. Then, a few more. Vorath noticed. From his seat at the highest point of the spiral, the High Speaker's compound eyes shifted toward the empty chairs. He said nothing. He simply raised one long, jointed limb and gestured to an aide. "Send someone to the human embassy wing. Find out why their ambassador is late." The aide bowed and hurried away. The session continued. Trade agreements were discussed. Border disputes were argued. Gorvon made a loud speech about Tulaki military expansion that nobody challenged because nobody wanted to deal with him this early in the cycle. 20 minutes later, the aide returned. He looked confused. He approached Vorath and spoke in a low, rapid voice. Vorath went very still. The human embassy wing was empty, not just unoccupied, empty. Every personal item had been removed. Every data terminal had been wiped clean. The cultural displays that humanity had carefully set up 10 years ago, photographs of Earth, small sculptures, a flag, all gone. The rooms were spotless. The air filters had been reset. It was as if no human had ever set foot inside. Vorath processed this information in silence. Then he addressed the hall. "It appears the human delegation has departed the Citadel," he announced. His voice was calm, almost bored. "This is not unprecedented. Species have withdrawn from sessions before, in moments of frustration. I expect they will return shortly." But they did not return. One day passed, then two. On the third day, Vorath sent a formal communication to Earth's diplomatic channels, requesting an explanation. The channel was open. The message was received. No reply came. That was when the whispers began. In the long history of the Galactic Council, a history stretching back over 12,000 cycles, no species had ever voluntarily left. Species had been conquered and absorbed. Species had gone extinct. One species had been expelled after starting an unauthorized war. But no one had ever simply chosen to walk away. The idea was so foreign that most delegates did not know how to react. Some laughed it off. A few were quietly terrified, though they could not yet explain why. Aboard the Earth flagship Bektu, which held position in deep orbit far from the Citadel, Hana sat at her station and monitored every communication channel the Council used. She watched the alien diplomats scramble. She read their messages to each other. Some panicked, some dismissive, some curious. "3 smaller species have already reached out to us directly," she told Suho, scrolling through the incoming transmissions. "The Fiavani, the Korath, the Selene. They want to know what happened." Suho sat in the command center, his hands folded in his lap. "What did you tell them?" "Nothing yet. I wanted your approval." "Tell them the truth. We left. We are not coming back." Hana nodded and turned back to her console. On the Citadel, Gorvan was doing what Gorvan always did, being loud. In a private meeting with his military advisors, he slammed his heavy fist against the table and declared that humanity's departure proved what he had always said. They were cowards, weak creatures who ran at the first sign of pressure. His chief advisor, a scarred old Talaki named Bren, did not share his confidence. "Ambassador," Bren said carefully, "I have completed the trade analysis you requested." He placed a data screen on the table. Human freighters currently operate along 43 primary shipping routes. They supply raw materials, medical compounds, and manufactured goods to over 40 species. If those routes shut down permanently, we project critical shortages within 2 to 3 months for at least a dozen worlds, including 3 Talaki colony systems. Gorvan stared at the screen. The numbers were clear. He said nothing for a long time. In the deepest archive of the Citadel, in a small room filled with data crystals that no one ever visited, Pel was working. Pel was a Fivani, a small rodent-like creature barely half a meter tall, with round dark eyes and quick little hands. Pel's official title was Junior Record Keeper, which meant that no one important ever paid attention to what Pel did. This suited Pel perfectly. Pel had been searching through old records, very old records, and Pel had found something interesting. 6,000 cycles ago, a species called the Urani had isolated themselves from the Council after a series of trade disputes. Within a century, the economic systems that depended on Urani resources had collapsed. The Council itself had fractured into warring factions. It took 800 years to rebuild. The Urani had been a minor species, economically significant, but militarily weak. They had controlled maybe 15 trade routes. Humans controlled 43. Pel saved the file, closed the archive, and said nothing to anyone. Not yet. On the 4th day, Suho recorded a message. He sat in front of a simple camera in a plain room aboard the Baekdu. He wore his ambassador's uniform for the last time. He spoke clearly and without emotion. To all 412 member species of the Galactic Council, This is Ambassador Suho of the United Earth Delegation. Effective immediately, Earth withdraws from all Council agreements, treaties, trade obligations, and mutual defense pacts. This withdrawal is complete and unconditional. We do not make this decision with anger. We make it with clarity. We wish you well. The message was broadcast on every open channel. Every species in the galaxy received it within hours. There were no demands in the message, no list of grievances, no threats, no ultimatums, no invitation to negotiate. It was a goodbye, and it was final. That was what made it so frightening. Vorath watched the recording alone in his private chamber. He watched it 3 times. Then he sat in silence for a very long time, his compound eyes reflecting the glow of the screen. He had spent 300 cycles holding the Council together by playing species against each other, by creating dependencies, by making sure that no single world could survive without the system he controlled. And now, for the first time, someone had looked at his system and said, no. Not with a war fleet, not with weapons, just with silence, just by leaving. Vorath turned off the screen. The room went dark. And in that darkness, for the first time in 300 cycles, the High Speaker of the Galactic Council did not know what to do next. 3 weeks after Earth went silent, the galaxy began to break. It started with small things. A shipment of medical compounds that never arrived at a Korath colony. A mining station in the outer belt that ran out of replacement parts because the human freighter that always brought them simply did not come. A communication relay that went dark because no one had realized a human crew had been maintaining it for the last 6 years. Then the small things became big things. On the Tulaki colony world of Gurath, hospitals began rationing antibiotics. The compounds they used were synthetic, manufactured in human orbital factories that had been producing them cheaply and reliably for a decade. Without them, infections that had been easily treatable became dangerous again. The colony's governor sent an emergency request to the Council. The Council forwarded it to the Drethani Pharmaceutical Division, which quoted a price 4 times higher than what humans had charged. The governor of Gurath refused to pay. He sent a second message, this time directly to Earth. Earth did not respond. On the Citadel, the Council was in emergency session almost every day. The Great Hall, that had once been filled with the calm noise of routine politics, was now loud with arguments, accusations, and fear. Delegates shouted at each other. Alliances that had held for centuries began to crack, as each species realized that the system they had trusted was not as stable as they had believed. Vorath tried to hold things together. He spoke with authority. He reminded the assembly that the Council had survived worse. He called for unity and patience. But his compound eyes moved constantly, tracking the room, counting allies and enemies. The numbers were shifting in the wrong direction. Gorvon stood before the Council and proposed a military solution. His voice was steady, his words chosen carefully for once. The humans have broken their treaty obligations, he said. They have abandoned trade commitments that affect dozens of worlds. This is not a withdrawal. It is an act of economic warfare. I propose we send a combined fleet to Earth and compel them to honor their agreements. The hall went quiet. Several delegates looked interested. A few looked horrified. Vorath considered the proposal. It had a certain elegance. A show of force might bring the humans back in line quickly, and it would demonstrate that no species could simply walk away from the Council without consequences. But there was a problem. Minho had spent years quietly building Earth's defenses. He had done it slowly, carefully, never revealing too much. The Council's intelligence on human military capability was outdated by at least 5 years. And the reports that did exist were troubling. Human weapons technology had developed along lines that alien scientists found difficult to predict. Humans did not build the way other species built. Their designs were strange, asymmetric, often ugly, and disturbingly effective. The Talaki War Council ran simulations. The results were uncertain, not clearly in humanity's favor, but not clearly against them either. And uncertainty was something the Talaki hated more than defeat. Gorvan's proposal was tabled for further discussion, which in council language meant it was dead. Then Ilsha changed everything. The Mirovan delegate had been quiet since humanity's departure. She had attended sessions, voted on routine matters, and said nothing of importance. But on the 23rd day, she requested the speaking platform. She stood in the center of the great hall, her blue-green skin shimmering under the golden light, her tentacles still for once. She looked up at Vorath. Then she looked at the rest of the assembly. "I have something to confess," she said. She told them about the secret resolution. She explained in clear and simple terms that a closed-door agreement had been drafted to permanently restrict humanity's fleet size and colonization rights. She named the species that had supported it. She described the meetings where it had been discussed. "I warned the humans," she said. "I told Ambassador Suho what was being planned. I did this because it was wrong. And I believe their departure is a direct result of this resolution, and of the years of deliberate obstruction that preceded it." The hall erupted. Delegates shouted. Vorath's compound eyes narrowed to dark slits. Gorvan looked as if someone had struck him across the face. But the real damage was not the shouting. It was the silence from the smaller species. The Fivani, the Selene, the Korath, the dozens of minor worlds who had always suspected that the council served the powerful at the expense of the weak. They listened to Ilsha's words, and they recognized their own experience in humanity's story. Within 2 days, 6 species formally requested to open independent trade negotiations with Earth, bypassing the council entirely. This had never been done before. Council law required all interspecies trade to be conducted through official channels. Vorath declared the requests illegal. He threatened sanctions. The Fivani responded first. Pel, the small record keeper who had spent decades in the archives going unnoticed, walked into the council chamber carrying a single data crystal. With steady hands that did not shake, Pel placed the crystal on the speaking platform and activated it. The Fivani Collective hereby gives notice of its intent to withdraw from the Galactic Council, Hel announced in a thin, clear voice. Effective in 30 standard days. The hall fell silent. Pel looked up at Vorath with dark, calm eyes, then turned and walked out. That night, aboard the Baekdu, Yuna was working the late shift in the communications room. She was young, just 24, with quick hands and a talent for pattern recognition that had earned her a place on Earth's most advanced warship. Her job was to monitor alien transmissions, routine work, mostly boring. But tonight, her console flagged something unusual. A transmission on a Drithani military frequency, heavily encrypted, routed through 3 relay stations in a way designed to hide its origin. Most systems would have missed it entirely, but Yuna had written custom detection algorithms in her spare time, and one of them had caught the signal. She spent 4 hours breaking the encryption. When she finally read the contents, her hands went cold. It was an order, signed with Vorath's personal cipher. It authorized a covert military strike on Earth's outer colonies. Not a full invasion, something smaller. A targeted attack designed to look like a pirate raid or a border incident. The goal was to create a crisis that would justify a full council military intervention against Earth. Yuna read the order twice to make sure she had not made a mistake. Then she stood up, walked to the bridge, and asked to speak with Captain Dohun. Dohun was a man who wasted nothing. Not words, not time, not emotion. He read the decoded transmission in silence. His face did not change. He asked Yuna 3 questions about the encryption method to confirm its authenticity. Then he opened a secure channel to Earth. Minho received the transmission. He read it. He contacted Suho. Suho sat in his quarters aboard the Baekdu and read the order that would have sent warships to attack peaceful human colonies. He read the careful language designed to hide what it really was. He read Vorath's signature at the bottom. He set the tablet down on the table and looked at Hana, who stood in the doorway. "They could have let us go," he said quietly. Hana said nothing. There was nothing to say. They both knew what this meant. Humanity had tried to leave peacefully. They had asked for nothing. They had threatened no one. And the Council's response was to plan an attack on their homes. Suho picked up the tablet again and stared at it for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm, but there was something in it that Hana had never heard before. "Get me Captain Dohun, and tell Minho to activate the defense grid." The game had changed. Humanity had tried silence. Now, it was time to speak. The Drethani strike force dropped out of faster-than-light travel in perfect formation. 200 warships, sleek and dark. Their hulls designed to absorb sensor signals. Their weapons already powered and ready. They had traveled for 6 days through empty space, following a route carefully chosen to avoid every known detection network. Their target was New Alson, humanity's outermost colony, a mining settlement built into the surface of a cold, gray moon orbiting a gas giant at the edge of human territory. It was home to 12,000 people, miners, engineers, their families. It had no military value. It had no defense fleet. It was, by every strategic measure, a soft target. That was the point. The Drethani commander, a veteran officer named Threll, studied the tactical display as his fleet approached. The plan was simple. Strike fast. Destroy enough infrastructure to create panic. Leave no clear evidence of Drethani involvement. The damage would look like a pirate attack or a rogue fleet action. The Council would then use the incident to justify sending a full peacekeeping force to protect human colonies, which really meant occupying them. It was clean, it was efficient, it was exactly the kind of operation that Vorath had perfected over 3 centuries of quiet control. Threll's fleet reached the moon and took up attack positions. Weapons locked onto the colony's power grid, its communication towers, its landing platforms. Threll gave the order to prepare for the first volley. Then his sensor officer spoke. "Commander, the colony is empty." Threll turned. "What?" "No life signs, no energy signatures from the habitation zones. The mining equipment is powered down. The landing platforms are clear." The officer looked up from her console, confusion plain on her face. "There is no one here." Threll walked to the main viewport and looked down at the surface. The colony was there. The buildings, the roads, the landing pads. But there were no lights, no movement, no ships. It was a ghost town. 12,000 people had simply vanished, along with every piece of equipment, every vehicle, every personal belonging. The humans had known they were coming. Before Threll could process this, every alarm on his ship screamed at once. Behind the Drethani fleet, space itself seemed to tear open. Ships appeared where moments before there had been nothing, not jumping out of faster-than-light travel, but decloaking. They had been there the entire time, silent and invisible, waiting. The Earth flagship Baekdu led the formation. It was enormous, angular, and covered in sensor arrays and weapon systems that Drethani intelligence had never catalogued. Flanking it were 40 escort vessels, each one bristling with technology that looked nothing like anything the Council had ever seen. Threll's tactical officer was shouting numbers, range calculations, weapon estimates, threat assessments. But Threll barely heard him. He was staring at the human fleet and doing the math in his head. His 200 ships against their 41. The numbers favored him. But the way those human ships had appeared, the complete absence of any sensor warning, told him that numbers might not matter. Then a communication channel opened. Not a narrow beam aimed at the Drethani fleet. A wide-band broadcast, the kind that reached everywhere. Every ship, every station, every planet with a receiver, the entire galaxy. Captain Dohan's face appeared on screen. He was a man in his 50s with gray at his temples, and eyes that looked like they had seen everything and decided most of it was not worth getting excited about. He did not introduce himself. He did not make threats. He simply pressed a button. The decoded transmission played. Vorath's voice filled every speaker, on every ship, on every station, on every world that was listening. The High Speaker's own words, in his own voice, ordering the covert attack on a peaceful human colony. Every detail was clear. The target, the method, the cover story, the intended political outcome. When the recording ended, Dohan spoke for the first time. You are now looking at 200 Drethani warships positioned above an empty, unarmed human mining colony. The people who lived here, 12,000 civilians, were evacuated 3 days ago because we intercepted the order you just heard. He paused. The galaxy is watching. We have nothing more to say. Live footage from the Bekdu's external cameras showed the Drethani fleet hanging in space above the abandoned colony. Weapons armed, targeting systems locked onto empty buildings where families had lived a week ago. Every species in the galaxy saw it. On the Citadel, the reaction was immediate and violent. The Great Hall descended into chaos. Delegates were on their feet, shouting. Some demanded Vorath explain himself. Others tried to leave. Vorath stood at his platform and attempted to speak, his voice cutting through the noise with practiced authority. This recording is a fabrication, he declared. Human deception. Their technology is capable of... He did not finish. Pell stepped forward from the back of the hall, the small Thivani barely visible among the larger species. But Pell's voice carried, thin and clear and impossible to ignore. I have something to add. It projected documents into the air above the speaking platform. Hundreds of them, scrolling slowly for all to see. Council records spanning decades. Classified operations against minor species who had resisted Council demands. Covert military actions disguised as pirate raids. Economic sanctions designed to look like natural market shifts. Evidence of vote manipulation, resource theft, and systematic suppression of any world that grew too independent. Pell had spent 20 years in the archives, 20 years of being ignored, overlooked, and underestimated, 20 years of quietly collecting every secret the Council had buried. These are not fabrications, Pell said simply. These are your own records. The hall went silent. Not the productive silence of thoughtful consideration, but the terrible silence of a system realizing it had been exposed down to its foundations. Gorvan was the first to speak. The Talaki warlord stood slowly, his massive frame rigid, his voice low and dangerous. I have defended this council for 40 years, he said. I have called the humans weak. I have mocked them. I have argued against their membership. He looked directly at Vorath. But I never agreed to this. None of my people agreed to this. And I will not stand beside a leader who attacks unarmed colonies and lies about it. He turned to face the assembly. I demand the immediate removal of High Speaker Vorath. The dam broke. Within hours, 17 species formally announced their withdrawal from the Council. Communication networks across the galaxy were overwhelmed with traffic. Ambassadors recalled. Trade agreements suspended. Military alliances questioned. Aboard the Bekdu, Hana watched the feeds from her station. Her screens showed a galaxy in motion. Ships launching, messages flying, governments convening emergency sessions. She turned to Suho, who stood behind her with his arms crossed. We won, she said. Suho shook his head slowly. We have not won anything yet. We just showed them the door. They have to choose to walk through it themselves. In the space above the empty colony of New Ulsan, the Drethani strike force still held position. 200 warships, weapons armed, with nowhere to go and nothing to shoot at. Commander Threll sat in his chair and stared at the tactical display that showed the human fleet surrounding his own. A communication from the Baekdu arrived. Text only. 4 words. You are free to leave. Threll read the message. He thought about his orders. He thought about the broadcast that the entire galaxy had just witnessed. He thought about what would be waiting for him when he returned to Drathani space. Then he powered down his weapons and ordered his fleet to withdraw. Captain Dohun watched the Drathani ships turn and accelerate away. He said nothing. He did not pursue. He did not gloat. He simply watched them go, then turned back to the bridge and began the long process of bringing the colonists of New Ulsan home. 1 year later, the galaxy looked different. The Galactic Council still existed in name. Its citadel still orbited the dying star. Its great hall still glowed with golden light, and its banners still hung from the walls. But the hall was mostly empty now. Of the 412 species that had once filled its spiral seats, only 130 remained. Most of those were Drathani client states, small dependent worlds that had nowhere else to go. The rest had left, some quietly, some loudly. Some had sent formal withdrawal notices, written in careful diplomatic language. Others had simply stopped showing up, the way humanity had done a year ago, and never came back. Vorath was gone. The High Speaker who had held the council together for 300 cycles, through manipulation, fear, and quiet violence, had been removed from power by his own people. The Drathani public had watched the broadcast from New Ulsan like everyone else. They had seen their leader's voice ordering an attack on civilians. They had read Pell's archive of buried operations, and they had decided, in the cold and practical way the Drathani made all their decisions, that Vorath was no longer useful. He lived in exile now, aboard a small transport vessel that moved slowly through the outer trade lanes. No one visited him. No one contacted him. He spent his days in a small cabin with a viewport that looked out at the stars he had once controlled. Sometimes he watched the news feeds from the galaxy he had shaped. He watched species he had kept obedient for centuries, now making their own decisions, forming their own alliances, trading freely without asking anyone's permission. He watched the system he had built his entire life around crumble into something he did not recognize. He never spoke publicly about what had happened. He had played the game the way it had always been played, and he had lost to a species that refused to play at all. Far from the dying citadel, in a region of space that had once been considered empty and unimportant, something new was being built. The station was called the Compact Assembly. It was not grand. It was not designed to make anyone feel small. It was a practical structure, built jointly by human, Mirovan, Fivani, and Talaki engineers over the course of 8 months. It was smaller than the old citadel. Its corridors were simple. Its meeting rooms were plain. But every seat in its main chamber was the same size, at the same height, arranged in a circle, with no one above anyone else. Ilsha had worked tirelessly for this. In the months following the broadcast, she and Hana had drafted the framework for a new agreement between species. Not a council with a hierarchy and a high speaker, but a compact, a voluntary association of equals. No provisional statuses, no closed-door resolutions, no secret military operations. Every agreement made in the open, every vote recorded and accessible to all. It was not perfect. Ilsha knew that. The old habits of power and suspicion would not disappear overnight. But it was honest, and that was more than the council had ever been. Gorvan had been one of the Compact's earliest and most surprising supporters. The Talaki warlord, who had once mocked humanity in the Great Hall, now sat in planning meetings and argued passionately for transparency rules and mutual defense agreements that protected small species alongside large ones. He was still loud. He was still aggressive. He still had a habit of slamming his fist on the table, when he disagreed with something. But the anger that had once been aimed at humanity was now directed at the systems that had used the Talaki as enforcers while hiding the truth from them. "We were tools," he told Hana once, during a late-night session on the new station. "Vorath pointed us at whoever he wanted to intimidate, and we went because we thought it was strength. It was not strength. It was stupidity." Hana had not argued with him. She had simply handed him the next section of the charter and asked for his notes. Gorvan had taken it, grumbled, and started reading. Pell had been offered a position that no Fivani had ever held before: independent archivist of the Compact. It was Pell's job to maintain complete and open records of every decision, every vote, every agreement. Nothing would be classified, nothing would be buried. The archive would be accessible to every member species at all times. Pell accepted the role with a small nod, as if it were nothing remarkable. But that night, alone in the new archive room, which was larger and better equipped than anything Pell had ever worked in before, the little Fivani sat quietly for a long time, looking at the empty shelves that would soon hold the records of something new. Something that Pell had helped make possible, simply by doing what record keepers were supposed to do: remembering. On Earth, Yuna had been promoted. She now led the Interstellar Communications Division, overseeing a team of analysts who monitored transmissions across the galaxy. She was still young for the position, but no one questioned her qualifications. The woman who had intercepted Vorath's secret order and broken its encryption in 4 hours had earned her place. Sometimes, late at night, when the operations center was quiet, Yuna thought about that night aboard the Baekdu. She thought about the moment when the decrypted text had appeared on her screen, and she had realized what she was reading. She had not felt brave in that moment. She had felt scared. Scared that she was wrong. Scared that she was right. Scared of what it would mean. She had walked to the bridge and told Captain Dohan anyway, because that was the job. You found the truth, and you passed it on, and you trusted the people above you to do the right thing with it. They had, and because of that, everything had changed. Minho watched the inauguration of the Compact Assembly from his office on Earth. The broadcast showed ships from dozens of species arriving at the new station, their running lights blinking against the darkness of space. It was a beautiful sight, quiet and hopeful and real. Minho was not a man who showed emotion easily. He had spent his career preparing for war, building defenses, running simulations of conflicts he hoped would never happen. He had spent years knowing that the Council would eventually move against humanity, and he had made sure that when that day came, Earth would be ready. But he had never built a weapon that could do what Suho had done. The most powerful thing Earth had ever deployed was not the Baekdu, or its cloaking technology, or its defense grid. It was a man who sat quietly in the back of a room for 10 years, endured every insult with grace, and then walked away when the time was right. Minho watched the broadcast. He saw the new station. He saw the circle of equal seats. He saw species that had been enemies for centuries sitting together and talking. And for the first time, in as long as he could remember, he smiled. The opening ceremony of the Compact was simple. No grand speeches, no displays of power. Just representatives from each member species taking their seats one by one in the circular chamber. Suho was invited to give the opening address. He stood in the center of the circle, wearing a simple dark suit instead of a uniform. He looked around the room at the faces, human and alien, that looked back at him. He took a breath. 1 year ago, he said, Earth made a decision. We left a system that was designed to keep us small. We did not leave because we were strong. We left because staying would have meant accepting that this, the quiet removal of our future, was all we deserved. He paused. We did not want a war. We did not want revenge. We wanted to be treated as equals. When that was denied, we chose silence. And in that silence, we discovered something important. He looked around the room once more. We discovered that we were not alone, that dozens of worlds felt the same way we did, but had never been given the chance to say so. This compact is not a replacement for the old council. It is not a new empire with different rulers. A promise that no species will ever have to be small so that another can feel large. He stepped back from the center. No applause, no cheering, just a deep, respectful silence that said more than noise ever could. After the ceremony, Hana stood alone at a viewport on the station's observation deck. Outside, ships from dozens of worlds held position in the gentle light of a nearby star. Some were massive cruisers, some were tiny shuttles. All of them were here by choice. She watched a Fiviani transport dock beside a Talaki warship. She watched a Miravan science vessel exchange signals with a human freighter. She watched species that had never spoken to each other before begin the slow, awkward, beautiful process of learning how. She thought about the empty seats in the old council hall. She thought about the banner that had hung behind a support column. She thought about Suho sitting in the back row for 10 years, waiting, watching, learning. She whispered to no one in particular, her breath fogging the cold glass of the viewport. This is how it was always supposed to be. Outside, the stars burned on, indifferent and eternal. But among them, for the first time in 12,000 years, something had changed. Not because one species had conquered another, not because a fleet had won a battle, but because a small, young, stubborn world had looked at the most powerful institution in the galaxy and said the one word that no one had ever dared to say before. No. And the galaxy, after 12,000 years of silence, had finally listened.